All right, so last time we met, we had started playing around with a very simple mean stack web application. So I'd like to review where we are, right? So then we can keep on going, adding some further features to this, right? All right, so here's the application is implemented under this directory, mean blog. And the entry point to the application is this index.html page which we are viewing right here. Notice lectures, mean blog. It's right here, lectures and mean blog. And we are accessing this index page, right, which is the default page if you don't ask for anything. That's why it's rendering. So here we have in that index page, we see that we have loaded a couple of things here. We've loaded the Bootstrap library for styling. We have loaded the AngularJS core library 157 from Google API, right? And that declares the global object Angular, right? And that Angular object also declares all sorts of behaviors, including declaring several attributes of its own, right? And they're all nicely namespaced with a ng dash, so that you don't, misinterpret it or confuse it with attributes that are native to the HTML language. So these are all non-HTML standard attributes, right? These are all declared by the Angular infrastructure. Yes? This one in particular is used for declaring an application called blog app, and this is going to go looking for the JavaScript declaration of this application as declared by an Angular module, right? And that Angular module we've declared ourselves in one of our JavaScript files here in app.js. Here in app.js, we see that we have declared a top-level Angular module called blog app, right, with no dependencies. This is what it says, right? So this string right here matches this string right here. Okay, this invokes causes the infrastructure to go looking for that module, and indeed it finds it. This module doesn't depend on anything, and we talked about modules being the mechanism that Angular uses to break up large application into smaller bits and pieces that you can then put together to build larger applications. Right now, we don't depend on anything. Back here in the HTML, we have declared a snippet of code here. This div, this piece of HTML, we have declared it as the template that's going to generate some dynamic content. Right now, originally there was no dynamic content, but eventually became somewhat dynamic. And for this to be dynamic, we're going to tie it with a controller that is going to be responsible for the dynamic content of this template snippet. Okay, following the design pattern that Angular imposes on us, right? It imposes that we should think of web applications as having three different buckets, right? One where we deal with all that has to do with the front end displaying content to the user, where we lay out the content, we make it look pretty, to be something to be consumed by an end user, and it's not responsible for knowing where the data lives, or it's only responsible for how that data is going to be displayed. Okay, it doesn't know where that data is coming from. Instead, the responsibility of the data or providing that data, the responsibility is for a controller who's responsible for this particular snippet of code, and which we have named here block controller, and declared it using the ng controller attribute. Again, an attribute declared by the infrastructure, the Angular infrastructure, right? As it says here, ng dash. So this is going to start looking for a JavaScript constructor, right, of the same name, right? Declared over here. We're using the dot controller notice that this is a several chained methods, right? Chained together off of the Angular object, right? Each one of these method calls returns Angular, right? So that you can keep calling several functions on that same Angular object, right? All these functions were implemented internally to allow you to implement this pattern, right? Of being able to chain together several of these function calls together, one after another. Right? This is very, very common in JavaScript, that functions are designed to behave that way. So whoever wrote module, whoever wrote controller, they wanted to provide you with that feature of being able to chain these things together, and indeed is very, very convenient. And you'll see a lot of that in jQuery and lots and lots of model view controller libraries, very popular libraries provide that feature. Anyway, so a controller allows you to declare the control by name. So this name matches this name right here. And then this controller function takes two arguments. One, the name for us to be able to declare it and then reference it elsewhere in the infrastructure by name. And then the implementation, right, the constructor that we are going to use to create an instance of this controller. Right, there's going to be a single instance of this controller. I use the same name for both, although more typically we use a camel casing for functions where we camel case we have all the words are lowercase except the first letter of each word except the letter of the very first word, which is lowercase, right? So that's camel casing. So that's a better name. But typically I use the same name just so I can keep it straight on my head, right? That what matches with what. A lot of this is convention, right? JavaScript development is lots and lots of convention. We all agree to do this, but there is no validation, very little to no validation of whether we're actually doing it the right way. We don't have things such as in Java or C# where you have interfaces, right? Where you implement an interface, right? And then it won't compile until you implement the entire interface. Yes, there's no such thing here, right? And a lot of these libraries behave and work if you follow convention, right? So lots and lots of conventions. So we're gonna. One of my conventions is that I use these same names, right? Anyway, so this is the function, the constructor, and so now. This constructor is tied to this div here, right? And everything that's in it. And the way these talk to one another is through the scope variable here that is being passed to us by the infrastructure. Right? The infrastructure is passing us that object, right? It's a magical object. The infrastructure instantiated it for us, right? And it's available here by name. It has to be that specific name. Okay, as we'll look at it a little bit later. It's using a technique called injection, right? That we can ask for certain features from the infrastructure by using a specific name. All right, just like here, I declared this instance. I declared it as block controller. So somebody can ask for this resource by name, and here it is. Right, here's where they tie together these names. Yes? Well, someone declared $scope by name, and I'm asking it for here, right here, and is injected. Someone's going to call this function and pass me an instance of this object. Okay? This object is referred to as a service, right? That gives me all sorts of magical powers to talk to the rest of the infrastructure. In particular, it allows me to bind objects to that instance, right? So that I can make it available on the other side of the fence, right? These templates, right? These HTML templates, so that I can pass along variables such as posts, right? Blog posts, right? So by declaring this array on this variable here, on the scope, it now becomes available on the template by name. So this blog post refers to this blog post right here. Everybody okay? All right. Now that it's declared in the context of this, in the scope of this template, I can refer to it by name right here, block posts, right? And I can use it as a variable in other bigger expressions, such as this expression over here that allows me to ng repeat is a attribute declared by Angular, right? That allows me to copy and paste a piece of DOM, right? A piece of HTML, a snippet, copy and paste it for every instance that is in a particular collection, right? So we have several post instances in the blog post, which are right here. There's 5 posts, right? So one for each. It'll copy and paste this over and over, right? For every instance in that collection. That's what ng repeat does, right? It just appends and appends and appends and appends, right? Cloning that content several times for every instance in the collection, and it declares local variables so that you can then reference each instance inside of that template, right? Using this escape sequence, this escape character sequence that allows you to refer to the local variables and any attributes inside of those object instances. Make sense? Everybody good? All right. All right. So this blog post allows me to send data back and forth. This scope allows me to send data back and forth between the controller and the template. But not only data, right? Also behavior. I can send behavior data, behavior across from the controller and the template, such as clicking on buttons or dragging or doing things. As I interact with the UI, I can generate events that can be handled by the controller. Okay. So let's add our very first event handler. So for instance, we would like to be able to create brand new posts. Okay, so let's create those posts. So as I type, I like to be able to click on post and add a post to my page. Yes? All right, so let's do that. Let's see. We have the button right here. There's the button. I would like to be able to generate a click event that can be handled by my controller. So to do that, we're going to use yet another attribute, right, from the infrastructure that allows us to declare event handlers. So I can say ng-click, and I'll say that I wanted to create a post. Okay, so that is going to just like this is declared on the scope, right, in the controller. This too would be something declared on the scope, right? I'm going to call a function that will be declared on the scope. So let's do that. We'll say scope dot create post, right? And this could be a function right here that we're going to invoke, and it's going to receive that event of me clicking on that button. So here we're going to do a console.log. Even though I'm going to be using lots of console log here, I don't want to see any console log in your source code. Right? I'm only using it for academic purposes and making a point. Instead, I want you to get used to using breakpoints and putting breakpoints in your source code on your browsers, right? And stepping through the code. All right. So here we're going to say I'm going to do a hello from create post. Right. So if I refresh and I click on this, we don't see anything happen. But if I look at the inspect and look at the console, let's put it on the let's put this on the right-hand side. And look at the console. Let's see, it indeed says hello from create post. Right. So that was generated at line 14. This line 14 right here. Yes. Everybody okay? All right. So indeed, we are connecting the behaviors behind back and forth. All right. So what do we want to be able to do? Well, what we'd like to be able to do is generate a blog that has this input field, right, as the title, and this text area as the body, right, the body of the blog post, right. So I'd like to be able to refer to this input field, and the way we can do that is by declaring a variable on this input field, tying it to some data model, to some schema, right? to some object that has certain attributes, right? So this would be an object, say a post, a blog post, and this would be the title of that blog post, right? And similarly, the text area would be a variable that is part of the same exact object instance, right? But has a different attribute. In this case, would be maybe the body of the blog post. Yes, right? Now this notice that this is allowing me to declare a variable, right, or an object, right, on the right here in the template, right, and it would be available also on the controller. So anything that is declared here, right, is available on the controller. Anything I declare on the scope is available on the template. It's a two-way binding. Whatever happens here is known in the controller. Whatever the controller does, the view knows, right? They're tied together, but they have very specific roles, right? Very specific roles. This one is targeting a human being, right, who needs to consume this. This one, has no idea how this is being rendered, right? Yes.
Say your content got really long to the point where it really makes sense to manage it as a string in JavaScript.
Yep.
What would you recommend using to make that content?
String. What do you mean? The string? String? You said?
I'm sorry. You said it's post body. Like where's the post body? I see content on the blog.
Yep. It's a text area.
Yeah. Say that content got really long.
Okay.
To the point where you don't want to manage it in your JavaScript file because that's all the
Okay.
what would you recommend?
None of this will be managed by the JavaScript, right? What it's going to take is going to take this content and immediately pass it over to the server, right, in a post, right? So the post object is going to be a JSON file, a JSON object of which one of the attributes will be the body, which could be fairly long, right? And it's going to be posted onto the server. Since it's a post, there are no size limitations, right? You would definitely not use a get. Right, you would use a post or a put, right? If you're modifying something that already exists, in those cases would be attached to the
You answered my question.
Yep.
Content is stored.
Yes, right. Yep. Okay. Yeah, awesome. All right, so blog body. How's that blog body? All right, so what I'd like to be able to do is pass along using object-oriented philosophy is that, well, I have this instance post, right, in this local variable, local template. I'm going to pass it as an object to the controller, right? So on the controller side, I can receive that as an argument post, right, and then just display it here to see what is coming back from the user interface. So if I refresh and I say that this is the title and this is the body, and I post, notice that makes it to the controller and as an object that I can then look at the attributes, right, on the controller side, right? But what we really want to be able to do is add it to the array of the blog post, right? But before I get there, I just want to show you a couple of things that might be a little bit disconcerting. Is that this object, right, lives, right, in the scope of this template, right, and it's an instance object that has attributes title and body. Until I don't type anything, the title and the body, the entire object doesn't actually exist, right? It's null, it's undefined, right? But once I start typing at the title, right, the object is instantiated magically out of thin air, and once I start typing at the body, right, the attribute body attribute is added to the body, and it could actually be rendered here using the escape characters post, right? Which if I try to render it, notice that it doesn't display anywhere, right? Because I haven't typed anything in the title or the body, right? But as once I start typing, notice what's happening, right? That as I type, right, that escape sequence, right? That escape sequence over here, right, is tied to the instance of post, right, of the post variable, and the infrastructure, the Angular infrastructure, creates all sorts of observers, right, that listen for changes in the data model, right? If anywhere that a variable changes and anyone is either responsible for creating the data or someone is responsible for rendering the data, right? It creates all the listeners and observers to trigger any changes in the data and notify anybody who's interested in that piece of data, right? So definitely this line is kind of like a listener listening for whatever happens to post, right? If anything happens to post, I want to be notified, right? If I'm going to be notified, I need to update myself. If it changes, I have a reference to that post, right? So it creates this kind of like references and pointers, right? That you could treat it as several pointers to the same data structure. If anyone changes that one single data structure, all the pointers, right, are referencing the same piece of data. Very, 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 very cool. Title and this is the body, right? Notice that everything is being rendered here. Now notice that this is a JSON object. Obviously, it doesn't really know what to do with it, right? So it renders the raw JSON. We could be a little more specific that I want the title here, and I want this to be maybe H1, right? And so as I type, right, this is the title. Notice that it's now not being rendered as JSON, but only the title, which is just a string, right, is being used to update the content here inside of an H1 dynamically, right? So these bindings that occur of these objects, right? It's what Angular refers to as double binding or two-way binding. Everything is listening to everything, and everything is notified, right? Is broadcasted to anybody who's has declare any interest in that piece of data, that data piece. Everybody okay? All right. Which is a pretty cool feature, right? I mean, to achieve something like this with jQuery, you would have to put all sorts of listeners and observers and notifiers and all sorts of things and update the DOM. Yes. I'm sorry.
Something is observing the changes, right?
Yes.
So what intervals is it observing?
Oh no, it's not polling. What happens is it's listening for the keystrokes, right? So whenever you type the key, right, the event is triggered, right, and then any listeners are notified. It iterates over everybody who had declared any observers will be notified of all the changes. So here's your new data model, right, and then it's your responsibility to do whatever it is that you do with it. In this case, is to render inline text inside of an H1, right?
Since this is a long tree,
Yep.
and we have tagging variables and angular variables.
Yep.
With each DOM branch.
Yep.
So my concern is will it broadcast or how will it be going up to the entire DOM?
Yeah. No. So what happens is that it creates a placeholder in the DOM, right? That says that it creates a rendering and says that this variable is tied to this DOM, right? So whatever this DOM happens, I am responsible for it, right? And if I get updated, right, I am notified of any changes in the data model that I'm listening on. Once I find the update, I have a reference to the DOM object that I'm responsible for modifying, right? So there is no traversal of the tree, right? I already have a reference to the DOM element that I am responsible for. Okay, there is no traversal or bubbling of any of these events, right? Already have references to these. We'll see that this too as well. This ng repeat, right? As you render each element, the original object or original instance that was used to render each div, right, still has pointers, references to that particular div that was used to render that particular object, right? So each DOM element has a reference. I'm sorry. Each object instance has a reference back to the DOM that it's responsible for, and if it changes, it will notify the div that it's responsible for, right? And we'll see that in a second. We'll see that in a second. So, for instance, one of the things that we might want to do, right, well, first of all, let's remove all these dummy posts. Yes, let's remove all these dummy posts because we're going to create a whole bunch of them together, right? So let's render that. Let's render that no post at the bottom, and let me also remove this this static content here. All right, so I'm going to when I create the post, what we'd like to be able to do is basically add this brand new post to that array, right? From an object-oriented point of view, that's what makes sense, right? So we'll do something like that. We'll say scope blog post, and we'll say dot push. Push is it's a native JavaScript method that allows you to just add append to the bottom at the end of an array. So we'll just say post, right? We'll just say post, right? So if I update this and I say title, this is my first post, right? And I say post. Notice what happens here. Oh, I don't have the body. What happens to the body? Did I call it body maybe? Oh, content. Content. So this, okay, let's call it body. So title, my first post. I say post. Notice how cool this is, right? I never said that I'm going to iterate, right, and start rendering this. If this were doing this with jQuery, right, you would have to clear out get a hold of the parent, empty the content, create the new DOM elements, right, append them, right, and do all this. Over here, right, you're providing the template for this, and the only one responsible for this is just ng repeat, right? Ng repeat is responsible for listening for anything that happens to blog posts, right? If anything happens to blog posts, ng repeat wants to know about it, right? And it's responsible for iterating every time there's a change in an addition or removal from this content. It's responsible for maintaining this. But now it doesn't necessarily iterate over the entire array again, right? It keeps track of what has been already rendered. It keeps track of every instance that has been modified, right? If a particular object in the array gets modified, it will modify that particular div that is responsible for rendering. It doesn't re-render the entire set of divs, right? That would be very wasteful, right? So it keeps track of this object, this DOM piece, right? This object, this DOM. If this changes, I will change the respective div that goes along with it, right? So it went on, and since the array changed, it added it to it went and it rendered it. Yes, right? But here's something that would be a little bit unexpected, right? If I go on and start changing the title, notice what happens, right? Right? The instance was added to the collection, and I am modifying that same instance, which if you're thinking about pointers, right? It's the same pointer to the same variable, right? And I'm changing the data structure that is pointed, and the pointer was added to the collection. So whatever happens to the original data structure happens to anybody who's looking at this, right? So it behaves very object-oriented kind of way, right? And that's that's the whole point. The whole point is for Angular to give you this object-oriented abstraction, right, of the DOM. So instead of using instead of the JavaScript knowing about classes or IDs or HTML elements, right, or knowing anything about the layout of the page, right, or the structure of the page, the controller has absolutely no idea of that, right? It is not the controller's responsibility of knowing that, right? It's a very strong distinction of the roles of these two things, right? Again, forcing us to think in model view controller in an object-oriented way, right? The controller just modifies the objects, right? It is the template's responsibility to then decide how to render this. Okay, make sense? But this is not what we intend. This is really not what we want. Notice that if I try to do a post, notice it's going to complain. It's going to complain because it assumes that in the collection there are going to be unique instances, right, added to the collection, so that it can determine, because it needs to keep track. This instance is being used to render that DOM, and that instance is being used to render that other DOM. Right? It needs to be able to maintain this. If you have, an object twice in there the same pointer, right? Which one is used to render what, right? It won't be able to distinguish which one maps to what in there. Okay, so it's complaining about that. So so to get around that a little bit, what we could do is that we're gonna break the pointer reference here. Instead, we're gonna just create a copy of the original object, right? And that's what we're gonna add into the array, right? So what we could do is create just a local variable, new blog, and we can just copy each element one at a time, or we could use Angular copy. Angular copy is a method that does exactly that. It clones an object, right? It creates a new instance, and then it copies it. It does a deep copy. Well, it could do a shallow copy or a deep copy of an object, right? And give you a new reference. But let's do this. Let's do it this way. Let's do title. It'll be the post title. So we're copying each one of the attributes one at a time by hand. So this will be the body. It will copy the post body. All right, we have that. And then we're going to be putting here the new post. So actually, let's use that name, new post. Right. So now if we go back and we say, and we add, okay, and then we keep talking. Notice that there's no tie now with the instances, and I can just keep adding that to the content. All right, make sense? Right. Very cool. All right. So let's keep going. Remember, for each entity, in this case, a blog would be a domain object, right? It would be an entity. We're going to create the 4 or 5 CRUD operations. We just looked at create. We already did read a little bit, right? Because this iteration of the blog post is kind of like a read, right? I have access to some data. I'm iterating over it, and I'm displaying it. Read operations are typically come in at least 2. One of them is being able to list all of them, right? All of them, and the other one is being able to access one in particular, right? We'll do that when we start updating an existing block. I like to be able to just read one of them, right? Retrieve just one of them, right? So that I can edit it. We'll do that in a minute. How about what about the other ones? CRUD. So create, read, update, and delete. Right, so let's do delete. That's an easy one. So I like to be able to, maybe click on an X or some button that would remove a blog post from here, right? I changed my mind. I didn't want to share that with my friends, and I want to remove that blog post. So let's put a button here. So for each in the iteration, I like to create a hyperlink that allows me to remove the blog post. So let's do an A, and I'm going to use Bootstrap has all these components that has all these cool glyphicons, or you can use Font Awesome. That's also very useful set of fonts. I'm going to grab this over here, right, and the documentation says that you can use just a plain old span and add it to the class of a span to be able to render this glyphicon. All right, so let's do that. So span class, and that's the glyphicon. So if I render that, right, I have the X there, perhaps in the wrong place. So let's put it in the right place. But notice that it's for each one of them. Also, so I don't have to type a blog post every time to demo this, let me create just a couple of dummy blog posts. Yes. So let's go back and create a couple of blog posts here. So title. My New Year's party, and the body, none of your business. Okay, so let's have there one object. So there it is. So my New Year's party. So I like to have be able to click on this X and remove it. So maybe appear maybe on this over here, right? So let's use another Bootstrap class that allows me to kind of like push it to the right-hand side and make it float, right? Float on the right-hand side, so that everything else is going to just wrap around that content. So I can say pull right is going to make it float to the right-hand side, so it shows on the right-hand side. So there it is. So I like to be able to click on this and remove that. I like to be able to notify the controller that I have clicked on it, right? So we can use again ng-click, and that I want to CRUD. So I want to delete posts, right? Which post? I want to remove the current post, right? Remember, this is iterating over several posts, and I want to pass along the actual post that I want to remove, right? Which is pretty cool, right? That every instance of the div that it's being rendered knows, right, which instance was used, which object instance was used to render this div, right? So that this is going to generate lots and lots of on clicks, right? But which one is going to be sent over? The original object that was used to render this. Again, this is all the Angular infrastructure allowing you to think, in an object-oriented way. All right. All right. So let's add the other scope dot delete post equal function function, and this is the post that I want to remove. Notice that we're going to generate several of these event handlers, right? To create, to read, to update, to select, to do all of these things. Notice that it's starting to get out of hand, right? We're going to have a very long page with lots and lots of event handlers. So one of the best practices that I'd like you to follow along is to declare all the event handlers way at the top, right? So that other folks that are reading your code can very quickly peruse through your code, see all the event handlers that this controller is responsible for, right? If they want to see how you implement it, sure, they can scroll down the page and see the implementation, right? But they're not forced to scroll down, right? Right? They want to read the implementation. So I'm going to change this just a little bit. Instead of implementing it this way, instead of using these anonymous functions, I'm actually going to declare these functions and give them names, right? And I'm going to declare them as functions as their own, right? And this create post, I'm going to just tie it to that function. It's the same thing. Nothing has changed, right? So I'm going to do the same thing with this delete post. I'm going to declare way at the top so that now they're declared way at the top, and I don't have to scroll down to read all your event handlers. Instead, I can read them way at the top, and if I care, I'll scroll down and read the rest of your code. All right? There it is. So make a distinction of declaration of variables, declaration of functions, declaration of all these event handlers at the top, and then at the bottom you can put some more some more implementation. All right. So here's the delete post. So here's the post. I can say console log post, and if I run this, if I click on this, notice that indeed I have the original blog, right? The blog post that I'm removing. If I add a new one and I do a post, and if I click on this one, notice that it'll be that one. Right? I'll get the correct instance that was used to render it, and it is that instance, right? In the collection. So if I click on one, I get one or the other, right? So what I could do is find where is this post in the original collection, right? And notice that these are all pointers, or at least that's what the infrastructure is making us believe, right? That these are references. These are all pointers. So I can look for this pointer, this reference in the original array, right? By iterating over it, I can just look it up by saying, take the original array, right? And do an index of. Index of works with references, right? So it's expecting a reference, right? To go through the array and finding that reference in that array. If it finds it, it comes back with the index. Yes? So index of post. So this is going to come back with the index of the post. And we can then use this index to splice out that element, that item from that original array, right? So we can say blog post splice. So splice is again, that's a native. So index of and splice, those are all native JavaScript functions. The splice allows us to either add or remove from an existing array, depending on how you use the syntax. Right? If you provide both syntax, you have to provide the index, the location, right, inside of the array that you want to manipulate. And then the second argument tells you whether you want to add things to the array or you want to remove things from the array. Okay, at that position. Okay, so if you say 1 or 2 or 3 or some value, non-zero value, it interprets it as removing. Right, you are going to remove one item at that location. Okay, that's how it's played. If you say 0, this is interpreted as, oh, you don't want to remove, right? You want to add things to the array, right? At that position. If you want to add things, then you have to add more things, like an array of things that you want to add to the array. Okay, we're not going to do that. Later on in the course, we will do that, but not today. So I'm going to remove one item at that location. Okay, so let's refactor that. Let's create a couple more posts. So this would be title, my daughter's birthday. Wow, she turned 11. So there it is, right? And so that if I click on one, I click on this one, notice it removes it, right? It splices it out from the array. The ng repeat gets notified, right, that the array has changed, right? And says, okay, I'm going to see which object is no longer in the array. Oh, this object is no longer in the array. Let me remove the div, right, from the DOM because I don't have that object instance anymore, right? It doesn't re-render the array, right? It doesn't actually clear out and re-render everything, right? It only updates and removes that one. Yes?
The hash key, what exactly is that?
Yeah, so, right, so to be able to support this behavior of pointers, in quote pointers, the objects, the array objects, the objects within the array, the infrastructure adds this meta information, right, so that it can treat them as if they were pointers, right? Yeah, all these objects become managed objects that are managed by the infrastructure. It lets you treat them like regular JSON objects, right? But they're actually embedded with some metadata so that the infrastructure can treat them and keep track of, oh, this object goes with that DOM, right? So it keeps track of a table, right? That says, this object goes with that DOM element, this object goes with that DOM element, right? And the way it uses like a hash table, and that hash table uses these names, right, to identify which object goes with what DOM.
So was this created
By Angular.
Okay, but because this item is in an array?
Yes,
But
right.
if it
Well, because it's being managed by Angular.
Okay.
And you're pushing things into an array that is inside of a scope.
Mm-hmm.
It says, okay, all right, so it's in the scope, I need to keep track of this object, right? The life cycle of this object, right? So it adds some metadata for you. Yep. We'll see similar things when we get to MongoDB. Same thing. MongoDB adds not only all the attributes that we add, but it adds other attributes to be able to keep track of versions, right? Also for indexing, right? And for quickly retrieving the data from the database. All right, so there it is. So we were able to implement delete. Any questions? Yes.
Can we have a separate ID? Say in the object itself we maintain an ID.
Yep.
We want to track by that particular ID.
Sure.
Not just for a hash key.
Oh, okay. No, well, the hash key is only used by the Angular infrastructure. It's not meant for us to use it at all, right? It uses so that it can keep track of, what's rendered on the page, right? Is mapped to that particular object on its own naming scheme, right? We should not ever touch any of those, right? You can do certain things like render, like sorting. Or pagination or things like that, using your own keys, right? Your own naming conventions. You could do filtering and all sorts of things that would allow you to do that. And we'll take a look at that when we look at more Angular stuff. Yep. But certainly we are going to add IDs, right? First, we'll add some dummy IDs so that they're forward compatible with Mongo later on, because Mongo is going to create its own key mechanism. But we're going to add them soon enough. Right? I think the assignment asked you. Oh no, not yet. In assignment number 3, they start asking you to add IDs. Yes. Yep. Yeah. The thing is that because this is by reference, we don't have to actually iterate over the over this. It's using hashing so that it doesn't actually iterate over it, since it knows where the pointer is. Right. It knows exactly which one it is that you're removing. Yes. Yep. Yes. Yep. Yes.
But when we added, if we added with the form, we were copying the objects. So will the hash key would be same or?
Well, the hash key in the array, right?
Oh.
So the array maintains its own hashing mechanism.
So
right?
when we delete, the hash key would be different, right? So if there are two same title and body elements in the array, how will it determine which to?
Well, no, the title and the body, those are values, right?
If they are same.
It doesn't use those at all, right? It uses the reference, right? It uses it as like a pointer, right? Notice that when we're looking for it, index of, right? When we do the index of, notice that we're using the reference, right? Treating as a pointer. Where does this pointer occur in the array, the container array? It doesn't use any of the title or anything like that.
I meant when we added the body and title,
Yep.
we copied the things, right? So it won't have the same reference. Would it?
Right. No. So it's creating a brand new reference, right, inside of the array, right? So there's the post object in the form, right? We created a copy, and the copy made it into the array. Once it's in the array, it has its own hashing mechanism, its own indexing mechanism, independent of the post that we had created originally, right? It will be completely two different instances that have nothing to do with one another, right? They happen to have the same body and the same title, right? But its indices are different, right? They're not even in the same array, right? And ng-repeat, uses its own hashing mechanism to maintain a reference between what object was used to render which DOM element, right? And which will introduce later on a challenge when we start, for instance, modifying. For instance, jQuery is very easy to start dragging things around and moving things on the page and reordering things, right? And Angular, and jQuery don't necessarily play nice together, right? jQuery is very low level, right? Very native, dealing with the DOM directly, right? Whereas opposed to Angular gives you this very high level abstraction, many layers of abstraction that hide all this DOM manipulation under the covers, right? And later on, when we come back to this, jQuery is fine with just moving DOM elements around, right, and just reordering them, and Angular is gonna have a fit, saying, wait a minute, I have my DOM tree in a particular way that maps to a particular order that I have in the model, and you're moving things around, and says because I have an object representation of what's being rendered, and somebody under the covers is manipulating the DOM underneath me, right? So we have to be very careful that these two worlds play nice with one another, because Angular has a very specific way, right, of keeping track of all these managed objects and all these references and how they eventually map to the DOM, right? So yes, we'll have to come back to this and see that it's quite challenging, right? When you want to have many competing libraries that they all have interest in manipulating the DOM. All right, let's stick to the high-level abstraction for now. All right, so we created, we deleted. Let's update, right? Let's do an update. Yes, question. Yes. Yeah, so splice, the second argument in splice, right, means how many how many elements do you want to delete, right? If it's 0, it interprets it as an insert, right? If it's bigger than 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, it interprets it as in you want to remove that many elements from the collection, from the array, right? So if it would be splice, index comma 4, it means that starting at index whatever, right? It'll remove 4 elements after that, right? So it's 0 or something bigger than 0. It'll remove from there to the end. Yes. No. Only that snippet, only that div was removed from the DOM, right? So if you would be doing this with jQuery, typically what you would do is that you would empty out all the parent container, right, and then you would reiterate, re-rendering everything, which would be very, very wasteful, right? Yes.
Because there will be code outside the container also.
Okay.
So if that can get refreshed, but this part will not.
Will not. Yes. Right. Exactly. Yep. Sure. We could say we could reassign somewhere, right? We could reassign that has an empty array, right? So for instance, we could add like an X here, right? Just remove everything. Hi, sir, please. So it's distracting. So let's we can add here a span class glyphicon. Oh, I don't have autocomplete. So let me copy that. So it would be something like that, right? And this would be ng click something like delete all, something like that, right? Right. So that so on the controller you can create an event handler that says delete all, implemented in a function of the same name, right? So here you could do something like blog post. It's equal to the empty array, something like that, right? So if you have that and you click on that, notice that they all go away, right? Right? Everything okay? All right. So let's keep going. So how about if I want to edit, right, a particular one? I want to be able to select it. So let's add. Next to each one of these guys, another button, right? But with a cog, right? A cog meaning that I want to be able to edit, right, or change something there, right? So how about if I click on that, we're going to select the post first, right? We're going to select the post, and so that if I select it, it'll copy the content here onto the form, so that I can then make some changes to the title or the body, right? And then a separate button would allow me to update the blog post, right? Let's do something like that. Select post. The select post would go here, an event handler that will allow me to select the post. So $scope select post. Right, that will allow me to do a select post, which here's a post element that we want to select. Let me go fetch the index. What we're going to do is that we're going to keep track of, where is that post that you selected, right? So that later on, when we do an update, we'll know which one was it that what was modified, right? First of all, let's find the index post and let's store it in the scope so that we can keep track of it. Right, index the post. Right, so we found it, and let's display it. See what it is. So we can say index post. So if I click on this cog over here, notice that it's 0. If I click on this one, it says it's 1. Right? so that I can change one or the other. All right, and if I add a new one, right, if I click on that one, it'll be 2. So 0, 1, 2. Everybody okay? Right. So what I'd like to be able to do is update this form element at the top, right, with that new with the one I selected, so that I can change the title, I can change the post, right. So what I could do is notice that the form elements, the input field and the text area, have an object associated with it on the scope, right? That's available to me on the scope. So I could say that $scope that post that title would be equal to the post that title, right? And the scope dot post dot body, it'll be equal to the post dot body. So I'm gonna update these two guys, right, with either this one. Oh, that didn't work. Set title of undefined. Oh, right. So notice that right now the post object currently is undefined, right? Because by default, nobody has actually typed anything yet, right? So by default, at first it's empty. So we could initialize it, and when it first loads the controller, we can initialize it to be an empty object, right? So that's it's already initialized, not undefined. So that if we do this now, and I click on this, notice that it copies the title and the body into the input fields in the text area, depending on which one I want, right? I should be able to just edit and then click on some button that would allow me to update that into the original location, right? So for that, let's add yet another button at the bottom of this. Let's add another button here. And let's give it instead of a primary color, let's give it like a green color, success, right? And we'll call this maybe update, right? And this will be update. And the post will have the new values of the post that we want to change it to in the array. All right. So let's do that. Let's create the event handler for the update, right? So that would be $scope dot update, right? And implement it here. The same name is going to receive the post, and what we're going to do is we're going to update the title and the body of the original object that was in the array, and we have the location is scope index, so it would be scope blog, right, at location scope index, right, and I'm going to change that. The title will be equal to the post.title, right, and the body, I'm going to copy the body as well, right. So that if I change this, right, I can change this to be it was awesome, right. I can click on updates and it changes in the correct location of that particular blog and post. I might also clear this after I update, right, because I've updated. I don't want it to be linger on there, so that I can change the post and just clear the content of the form, so that I can change this. Lots of dancing, and I can update, and then it clears the form so that I don't leave the previous blog post on there. All right, everybody okay? Everybody still with me? All right. All right. So the next thing is that is to realize that all of this is on the client side, right? None of this happens on the server, all right? So let's now look on how we can move a lot of this logic on the server in Node.js, right? And then eventually onto MongoDB.